Hello there, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Licciardello.
Plenty to chat about again this week, Chaz. Donald Trump has ignited a huge debate over Kamala Harris's biracial identity, just as Harris has continued to surge in the polls.
And as JD Vance faces criticism for those childless cat lady comments, we'll take a look at the natalism behind it and find out what's really going on with America's birth rate.
But first, Donald Trump has ramped up his attacks on Vice President Kamala Harris, making a series of controversial remarks in Chicago yesterday at an event hosted by the National Association of Black Journalists, where, among other things, Trump questioned whether Harris is really black.
I've known her a long time indirectly, not directly very much, and she was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
She has always
but
identified as a black woman. She went to a historically black college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a black person.
And you can tell there from the jeers from the audience, it was a bit of a train wreck appearance by Trump. He criticised reporters, the organisers of the event, the sound system, pretty much everything. And then after only about 30 minutes, Trump's team wrapped the whole thing up.
We have to leave it there by the Trump team. All right. So leave it. That is the last word. Thank you so much, Mr. Trump, for coming today and joining us.
Well, thank you very much.
They've been telling us.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, very much. Great honor.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
NABJ will email about details regarding the conversation with Vice President Kamala Harris in September. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Well, very weird. Trump remained unrepentant, though. He doubled down on social media.
Crazy Kamala is saying she's Indian, not black. This is a big deal. Stone cold phony. She used everybody, including her racial identity.
And as proof of that, Trump has been spreading this clip.
So what we're going to cook today is an Indian recipe.
Yes.
Because you are Indian.
Yes.
Okay, and I don't know that everybody knows that, but I find that wherever I go and I see Indian people at the supermarket, on the street, everyone's like, you know Kamala Harris is Indian, right? It's like the thing we're so excited about to have you running for president.
Yeah.
So we're both Indian, but actually we're both South Indian.
Yes. You look like the entire one half of my family.
Okay, thank you.
You do.
I've been telling people we're related already, so this is perfect. It's basically true. And so were you raised eating South Indian food?
Hang on. So that's his evidence that she's posing as an Indian.
He's sending that clip around, yep.
Okay, in that clip, that's his evidence, Mindy Kaling said, not everyone would know that you were Indian.
Right.
So, which suggests that she wasn't posing as an Indian, according to his own evidence.
Brilliant, Holmes. Harris does say in that she is Indian, however, and that Mindy Kaling looks like half of the Harris family. But at no point, of course, does Harris say that she is not black, as Trump asserts. Other proof that is being shared now by Trump supporters, includes news stories from 2016, which said that Kamala Harris had become the first Indian American in the United States Senate. That is true. But they conveniently ignore reports from exactly the same time, which also noted that Kamala Harris had become the second black woman elected to the United States Senate. She's both. The fact of the matter is very, very clear. Harris has made no secret of it. She is biracial, with Indian heritage on her mother's side, while her father came from Jamaica. Kamala Harris's birth certificate is now being shared online by Trump supporters like Laura Loomer as alleged proof that she is not black.
I have a copy of Kamala Harris's birth certificate. Nowhere on her birth certificate does it say that she's black or African. Kamala is a liar.
But if you look at the birth certificate, it clearly states her father was Jamaican. It doesn't say black or African, but here he is, Professor Donald Harris. He is a retired Stanford economist. His family background is mostly Afro-Caribbean. There is also evidence that he's descended from an Irish slave owner in Jamaica as well, and the fact checkers have concluded, therefore, it is likely that Kamala Harris is both a descendant of slaves and slave owners. And all of this is obviously very familiar. Trump and others claim that Barack Obama wasn't really a member of the black community back in the day. Remember we saw pictures like this back in 2008? Obama's mother was white from the Midwest, his father was from Kenya. Trump peddled the idea that Obama himself was born in Kenya, was a Muslim and not legally president of the United States. And Trump also mocked Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren's family history, which included stories about Native American heritage. He called her Pocahontas, still does. And Trump suggested that she too was an academic diversity hire. But the fact in all these cases is very, very clear. And here's how Kamala Harris responded to Trump's attack.
Donald Trump spoke at the annual meeting of the National Association of Black Journalists. And it was the same old show. The divisiveness and the disrespect. And let me just say, the American people deserve better. The American people deserve better.
I think that was a pretty good response from Harris, saying that it's the same old show, because it really did feel like, here we go again. We've seen all of this before, and certainly in the case of Obama. The birtherism stuff, it may have been very damaging in some ways. It didn't damage Obama's presidency. It tried to delegitimise him, and to many people it was purely motivated by racism. But Obama stayed president for 8 years.
Yeah, look, I think it's really smart of her to not act super angry. Like, he's trying to slow her roll, right? So I think the thing that she's got going for her at the moment, she's having fun. She has a lot of enthusiasm, has a lot of excitement and energy. She shouldn't let this sap the energy away. That's what he wants. And so I think that was a good response for that reason. She was serious, but she wasn't so serious that he actually had an effect.
I have yet to see in her rallies and her campaign appearances, fundraisers and so on, she isn't leaning into the history that she could make as the first female president of the United States. Think back 8 years ago, and Hillary Clinton, a lot of her campaign was, it's time for a woman president, or is it time, or is America ready for a woman president? That's not a part of the current conversation, nor indeed first female of colour to become president. Just as her vice presidency, we kind of went, okay, no. Biden said he was going to pick a woman of colour. He did. We moved on.
Once again, I think that's smart. She doesn't need to. People will do it for her. Like, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
So, yes, I think that's smart. But back to Trump's attack line. I think this attack line is laughable, I should say. First of all, what he said is plainly untrue. It takes like 1 second of Googling, I did it, to find an article from 2004, that's pretty early on, San Francisco Chronicle. Kamala Harris was sworn in Thursday as the first black woman in California history to serve as district attorney. That's right at the beginning of her career. Okay, so what he's saying, untrue.
Yeah.
Number one. Number two, it's laughable as well that someone whose entire worldview is that they don't believe a single thing from the media uses as their entire evidence one headline from a newspaper. That is also very disingenuous.
Yeah.
Number three, Trump's spokesperson in 2016 specifically cited a donation he made to Kamala Harris at the beginning of her career as evidence of him being quite kind to black people.
Right.
That was they specifically cited a donation to Kamala Harris as a black person.
So what's this about? It is about Trump being concerned that where he was appearing to make inroads amongst black voters when he was against Joe Biden, he is seeing that additional 5 or 7% of black support that he was gaining over the typical Republican is now under threat because of Kamala Harris's racial identity, and that he basically thinks, well, it's not fair that I'm losing black votes because she's not properly black. I mean, that's essentially what's going on here, isn't it?
Look, I don't know what's going on in his head, but I have this feeling. I mean, look, it was definitely prepared. There's no doubt this was prepared because they had all their evidence ready to go immediately afterwards. So he intended to do this. Also, the question they asked didn't lead to that answer. It wasn't a natural segue. He ratcheted it in, like he wanted to give that answer.
And he chose 3 black female journalists on stage with him asking questions and a mostly black and brown audience to drop this premeditated bombshell.
It was clearly intentional. So to answer your question, what's going on in his head, I'm not 100% sure, but I think your explanation is as good as any. Another I would say is maybe he's just annoyed. Yeah. Maybe he's pissed off about the last 3 weeks. He thought the election was in the bag. All of a sudden, the polls are moving against him. The excitement's moving against him. Kamala Harris is the first person to hold a Trump-like rally in about 10 years, other than Trump. I think that this would. The fact that everything's moving so quickly against him all of a sudden, I think would be really annoying him, and maybe he's just acting out.
Yeah, it does seem as though he's still at that. They're still trying to struggle to pivot to a Trump-Harris election rather than a Trump-Biden election. There is a certain amount of throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what's going to stick. But again, a lot of we are hearing the same attack lines that were trotted out against Obama in 2008. The fact that his voice changed depending on the audience that he was speaking to. He would sound more Southern when he was in the South. He would sound more Midwestern when he was in the Midwest, and that he was this chameleon, a shapeshifter, insincere, fake. They say, Kamala Harris, well, Ted Cruz is going on about, she spent most of her life in Canada. Well, she went to high school in Canada before moving back to California, where she was born, and spent the first 12 years. But this narrative is taking off, that she is adapting she sounds Southern when she's in the South. Whether that is a way of fitting in, whether it's a way of relating to people or whatever, I don't see it as a bad thing that you're trying to communicate with people.
Well, before I take on that, I just wanted to say that there is one change between the past and now, and that is this time Trump's got some help. And because I think while his accusation was kind of laughable, I think when he pulled Vivek Ramaswamy into it, it became slightly more credible.
On a very personal level, my parents were immigrants to this country, legal immigrants from southern India. Very same part of India that her mother also immigrated from. I think it's a hard fact, Martha, it's just a fact, whether you like it or not, that many Indian Americans in the United States are indeed somewhat offended by the way Kamala has suddenly cast aside the Indian American side of her identity. She leaned into it when she ran for office in California. Big Asian American and Indian American population. So she wore that when it was convenient. She's wearing a different identity now when it's politically convenient on a national stage. Personally, I don't think we should be relying on these ethnic identities at all. We're actually American. And the problem is when you're Kamala Harris and you actually do lean into your identity politics, then you open the door to that type of criticism. But if you ask me, that shouldn't be how this election is decided one way or another. It should be decided on our own identity as Americans and what our vision is for the future of the country.
Okay, now that's been Ramaswamy's view all along, that about not putting forth your identity when you're in politics. Right.
We're going to take your identity because you put forward your identity in the first place. Great logic.
Well, yeah, I don't want to take apart the logic so much as just suggest that he, I think, is more credible than Trump. But I want to just follow up a little bit. He's talking about her leaning in, and I'd like to know what leaning in means. Because, speaking as someone who has one ethnic identity, I don't have two, I know that when I'm hanging around a bunch of Aussies like you, I would call myself Australian. If I'm hanging around my family, I'd call myself Italian. Just like they do.
Right.
And I'm not running for office.
Yeah.
That's just different parts of your identity have different prominences in different circumstances.
Right.
So when he's saying at one point in time, she leant in to being Indian, what does that mean? Does that mean she did some interviews with Indian papers? Does that mean she talked about her family at different occasions? That's just how it works.
Yeah.
That's completely reasonable. Or does he mean she went around campaigning in a sari for 6 months? Now, that would be a bit more exploitative. And so far, I'm not seeing any evidence of any kind of, inverted commas, leaning in that would be exploitative at all. It's just a couple of headlines from people who chose to emphasise different parts of our identity, which is totally fine. The only photo we've seen of anything that looks Indian in any way is this one here, which is a family photo. That was some more proof, by the way, from the online right. They go, here's some proof.
Yeah.
Just a family photo. And so my response is simple. If you think she was exploitative in any way, shape or form at any point in time, put up or shut up. Right now, we got 0. And something tells me that's how it's going to stay. Yeah.
And a brief note as well, a lot of people sort of say, how are we meant to say her name? Because we hear it so many different ways. And it's a little bit tricky because if we're trying to pronounce it with an Australian accent, slightly different to American, but so the phonetic guide is Kamala, as in the punctuation point, comma, la, but said with an Australian accent rather than an American accent, it's going to be more like karma, la, as in karma chameleon, la. But typically Trump and Conservatives try and put the stress on the ma, not the ka, so it's Kamala. Why they're doing that, whether it's just we're not choosing to learn your name correctly, or whether they think Kamala, a little bit like Malala Yousafzai, maybe it sounds more foreign than American. I don't know why they, or whether it's just we don't care enough to figure out your name.
I don't know. Republicans haven't learnt that the Democratic Party is called the Democratic Party for the last 50 years. They still call it the Democrat Party. So
I think that's a deliberate troll as well.
Slow learners.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a deliberate one. But look, one of the hundreds of media professionals gathered in Chicago for this week's conference of the National Association of Black Journalists is Maya Prabhu. She's a reporter with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and she spoke to me earlier from Chicago. We did get a bit of a sense of it, I suppose, from listening to the clip, but you were there in the room. What was the reaction when former President Trump started to question Kamala Harris's racial identity in that way?
I think there was just a lot of shock and disbelief. There was, awkward laughing, just kind of surprise at what he was saying. And, as someone who also is Black and Indian, I have a Black mother and an Indian father, it's an interesting thing to hear a presidential candidate say, a former president say, when that's conversations that I've had growing up my whole life. It's interesting to hear it come from like that level.
So Mike, can I ask, for you, was there growing up a certain social pressure to pick a side when it came to your biracial identity as well?
Being biracial, I think, is difficult for most people who are biracial. Speaking with other friends who are, I find that people typically identify with the culture of their mother, or at least the dominant parent. For me, that was my Black mother. I identify as, Black American. I went to a historically Black college, just like the vice president did as well. So there's not necessarily pressure to pick a side. I think it's just a lot of confusion around like not understanding that someone could feel and be both.
And seeing Trump talking in that way, was it your sense that it's just something that kind of popped into his head and out of his mouth? It was all off the cuff, or was he deliberately setting out to be provocative?
I don't know that he was necessarily trying to provoke a controversy. I think that having watched him since 2015 as in his politician era, I think that's just how he talks and how he thinks. I don't know that he's ever necessarily looking for a specific thing that will, go viral or make him be the center of news attention. I think these are just the things that come across, in his mind. And we've seen similar remarks from other people, whether they be liberal or conservative, on social media, whether they're politicians or just average citizens. So he's not saying anything that other people haven't said or thought, but I think he just has that ability of saying things that end up dominating the news.
And Maya, as journalists, how do you think we should respond when Donald Trump says something like this? Should we be fact-checking him and countering the claims with evidence? Or is that risking falling into a sort of narrative trap that he is setting for us?
I don't know that it's necessarily letting former President Trump set the narrative as much as fact-checking, saying this is what it is, this is the ethnic background of the vice president, and maybe, moving on. I think the news media, as someone who is biracial and has heard these questions her whole life, I think the larger media, quote media, is kind of focusing a little bit more attention on it than I think it could deserve, depending upon or based upon just my own background and growing up and hearing these questions my whole life.
Maya, there are some journalists and commentators who maintain that Donald Trump should never be given a platform, whether it's an interview or a debate stage. He has such a long history of making provably false statements, that it's irresponsible to hand him a microphone under any circumstances. What do you think of that whole debate?
I think it's difficult to say. I think people know that Trump says things that are untrue, but I also think that he is a major party candidate running to be president of the United States again. So it's definitely a line that has to be walked. And I don't think anyone, press here, press across the world, has figured out what that line looks like.
Finally, Maya, in so many ways, this is a different election campaign than it was just a couple of short weeks ago. Certainly now race and gender are front and centre in a way that they weren't when it was a Trump-Biden campaign. What are the implications of that, not just in terms of what we're going to be discussing and reporting, but also the electoral implications? States like your home state of Georgia suddenly now seem to be in play in a way that they weren't 2 weeks ago.
Definitely, as someone who's been covering the campaign in Georgia, I would say events for President Biden definitely had a different energy than the events that have happened since he's dropped out of the race and since Vice President Harris has been, the presumptive nominee. I think in states like Georgia and other states in the South that have large Black populations and large city centers like Georgia, and with Atlanta and Savannah, I think it definitely does bring Georgia back in play in a way that it may have been written off before Vice President Harris was the presumptive nominee. How much of an impact it actually has, I would say, remains to be seen.
Maya Prabhu from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, thank you so much for having a fireside chat with me.
Thank you.
The national polls this week show Kamala Harris is continuing to close the gap with Donald Trump, and in some cases, she is taking the lead. Harris is 2 points in front in a YouGov poll, 1 point in the Morning Consult poll, the same margin in the Ipsos poll, while Trump was still 4 points up in the Harris poll, ironically enough, while Harris is 2 points up in a Redfield poll and Trump leads by 2 in a McLaughlin poll. So the national popular vote right now is very much a toss-up. Yet the average of state-based polls since Harris became the likely Democratic nominee shows that Trump does retain the upper hand, at least for now. If an election had been held this week, Trump would have won the presidency with 297 Electoral College votes to 241 for Harris. It is, of course, 270 to win. But momentum is everything in an election campaign like this, Chaz, and it does seem there has been a major shift, including now at that state level as well.
Yeah, I want to point out two things with the polls, because we are starting to see some consistency now. First of all, demographics are quite consistent. I'll just cite YouGov here, but I could have cited any number of polls. They're all showing the same thing. She's 11 points up amongst Black voters, 5 points up amongst Hispanic voters, 7 points up amongst women, and 7 points up amongst young voters. Pretty much every single poll is showing something around that area for those four demographics. So that seems to be consistent. The other thing, which I think is interesting, is the actual, not just the numbers, but the actual dynamics of this race may have changed as well. Possibly permanently, maybe not. And that is, we have spoken this entire election campaign about the double haters. Well, the double haters, according to the Washington Post at least, have dropped from 20% of the electorate to 8%. That has gone away. Yep. And RFK is having the lowest numbers of his race. He's down to 5.5% and lower in a bunch of polls as well.
So these are the people saying, I don't like my choices, I'm still planning on voting, however, and I may suck it up between either Biden or Trump or park my vote with Robert Kennedy, but they're now saying, I like the look of Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
It also implies that the 1 in 3 registered voters who typically do not vote, the 80 million stay-at-homers each 4 years, that could also be shifting right now. We've got these models that come in the polls talking about likely voters. We've got some polls that are all adults, some are registered, some are likely voters. It's going to be fascinating to see how they recalibrate who is now a likely voter, because one of the keys to being a likely voter is, did you vote in the midterms 2 years ago? Did you vote in the last Trump-Biden campaign? An all old white male campaign. Kamala Harris potentially has a little bit of an ace in the hole here, because she is appealing to some of those 80 million Americans who could vote but choose not to vote.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And look, this is still early days. She's in her honeymoon period. We may just revert to where we were with Biden in a couple of weeks' time. We just got no idea. But if this continues as it is, I'm not saying she'd necessarily win or lose, but what I am saying is we might not get a complete repeat of 2016 and 2020 like we were expecting.
Yeah.
We may revert back to the
Obama electorate of 08 and 12.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, like I said, I'm not saying the result will be like that, but the rules might be more like that. Like, we were preparing for just an exact replica of 2016 and 2020, and that might not be coming.
Yeah, and of course, Obama in 2008 did manage to win North Carolina, which means potentially the polls that suggest that's now within 2 or 3 points. Georgia is also looking a lot more competitive than it was 2.5 weeks ago. But some of the polls are really scrambled still. In the same week, there were polls showing Harris leading in the Morning Consult poll in Michigan by 11 points.
Yeah.
Which is hard to believe that, if she wins Michigan by 5 points, she's going to be very, very happy.
Yeah. Let's not jump to conclusions on the state polls. The state polls are always, you want a few of them because the sample sizes are much smaller.
Yeah, well, for sure, Democrats are going to be hoping that Kamala Harris's vice presidential pick in the next few days, followed, they then hope, by a successful convention in Chicago in the next fortnight, is going to give her a further boost. The first rally with Harris and her newly minted running mate has been scheduled for next Tuesday evening in Philadelphia, US time, Wednesday here. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Does that mean that Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania is going to be her VP? That's what all the scuttlebutt is suggesting. I mean, you'd have to say, it'd be a bit weird to say, here, Pennsylvania, is my running mate, Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, or Tim Walz from Minnesota.
Yeah.
But Kelly, Walz, and Shapiro seem to be the three finalists if reports in most major newspapers and TV networks are to be believed. Tim Walz is kind of, I guess, the dark horse in this. Not nearly as well known as a governor of a Midwestern state. Minnesota was looking competitive. It's been safely Democratic for a long time, since the days of Hubert Humphrey. But it was looking competitive for a while there, with Trump putting it well and truly in the toss-up column. Looks less so now. So is there any reason for her to choose Tim Walz?
Well, look, he's a less glamorous pick than Josh Shapiro. Josh Shapiro could easily end up being a presidential candidate himself.
Yep.
Tim Walz does not look like presidential material. He looks crumpled. In fact, he's the same age as Kamala Harris, but he looks about 30 years older.
He does. Does she need that? I mean, Obama benefited from having an old white-haired guy as a running mate to cover up for his perceived lack of experience. Harris, after 4 years as vice president, 4 years as senator before that, does she need kind of like somebody who looks older than her to satisfy worriers?
I don't know about age, but what he does provide things she doesn't have. Like, for instance, she's looking for someone who can talk to the white working class. He's definitely the white working class whisperer. Like, he is a lot more left-wing than Mark Kelly or Josh Shapiro, but he's in a Republican +7 electorate and wins it easily. Because he's a small town guy, he's a teacher in a very small town. He knows how to speak to those people, so he does have those skills that she's looking for. And he's pretty good with messaging. Like that whole weird thing we talked about last week, that's from him. Yeah,
he started talking about Vance and Trump being weird. Minnesota's interesting. I mean, like Walter Mondale on your T-shirt there. Mondale, Hubert Humphrey, there has been this sort of working class Democratic Farmers Party, the DFA. There's been this sort of populist liberal tradition in Minnesota that has encompassed gun owners and military types as well. So he is an intriguing figure, but I think you're right. He's affable, but he I don't know. He kind of looks like Tim Kaine 2.0 in a sense.
Yeah, I feel like he's more a base pick rather than going to the centre, and I think that she's every single thing that Kamala Harris has done in the last 2 weeks is moving to the centre.
Yeah.
So I feel like, the Mark Kelly, Josh Shapiro pick is most likely.
Yeah, and potentially Shapiro being Jewish American also gives Harris a bit of space to be more pro-Palestinian or at least pro-humanitarian when it comes to the situation in Gaza without being open to claims of anti-Semitism. That and the fact that she's married to an observant Jew in Doug Emhoff as well. That's probably a bit of cover at the same time. As for what Democrats think of all of this, a poll this week probably didn't shed that much light. Shapiro was narrowly preferred over Mark Kelly. That is probably just as much about name recognition as anything else, and a couple of other well-known people there in Whitmer and Newsom that are not really in the race. Interesting though, this week, Chaz, there was another poll that was bad news for Trump's vice presidential running mate, JD Vance. It showed that he's really struggling with just 27% of respondents with a favourable view of him. 40% negative, they've got an unfavourable view. The rest still just do not know.
Just to put that in context, there has, at least for the last 45 years, not been a single vice president who ever started off with a negative net favourable rating.
Yeah, there's usually a fall in love, fall out of love cycle.
Sarah Palin, who is probably considered the biggest disaster in the last 45 years, started off with a 26-point net approval.
Yep.
And JD Vance is starting with a worse than 10-point negative approval.
So there are lots of, we talked on Planet America this week about the childless cat lady comments, this idea that the Democratic Party is being run by people who are inherently unhappy because they don't have children, and they want the rest of America to be unhappy and childless just like them. It was a weird kind of an argument. He wasn't making it in this campaign, though. He was making it in a campaign 2 years ago when he was trying to run for Senate in Ohio.
Yeah, I feel like he might be the first presidential level victim of being too online. Like in that, you got to remember where he was coming from. Like in 2022 when he was running for Senate, he was coming from being extremely well known as being anti-Trump.
Yep.
And having and I think a lot of Republicans would have thought he was a crypto Democrat, and I'm not convinced he wasn't a crypto Democrat, to be honest. So he was trying to win them over, and the way he was trying to win them over was by going real hard in the directions that he thought they would want him to go. At this point in time in 2021, when he made the cat lady comments, he was losing badly in the Senate primary race for Ohio, and so he gave a speech which was it's a cause that he genuinely cares about, which is the dropping. He's a natalist. He's concerned about the reduction in birth rates in America. And there's a lot of people who are concerned about the reduction in birth rates in America. There's all kinds of reasons. There's some basic economic reasons, like for instance, if you don't have enough children, you have fewer workers supporting the older people retiring, right? I mean, there's all kinds of reasons. But anyway, he takes that very seriously.
Sure.
He gave a speech where he was taking it seriously. He threw in a little bit of red meat, and the red meat went off. And then Tucker Carlson wanted to talk to him, and he would have thought to himself, oh, here's my meal ticket.
Yeah, right.
Now I can get them liking me. And so he gave Tucker Carlson a whole lot more red meat. Those were the cat lady comments. And they went well for him. Yeah. So then he just kept on going. Yep. And he didn't shut up then, did he? There was like months and months and months of all this childless stuff going to Democrats.
And it's not just childless, but it's also looking at some of the reasons why there aren't as many children, including abortion. So he wants to make it harder to get an abortion. He wants to make it illegal for abortion pills to be sent through the mail. He also wants to make it harder to get a divorce. He thinks it should be harder to get a divorce, even in cases of domestic violence. We're making it too easy to get divorced, all in the name of because we should have more kids.
Yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts on that. The first of which is I'm always a little bit uneasy when we get to the domestic violence thing with JD Vance, because he grew up in a family with domestic violence. And it's not like he's saying that they should legally change the divorce laws. His line was people need to think about the kids more. It might be better for the mums and the dads, but it's not good for the kids. And I mean, I disagree with him on that. I don't see how it's good for kids to grow up in an environment with domestic violence, but he did and I didn't. Yeah. And so I'm sort of conscious of that. I'm a little bit uneasy about that. But having said that, there's no consistency in what he's talking about.
At best, he's talking from the child's perspective,
Yeah.
with a complete lack of insight into what the person who is surviving domestic abuse is enduring.
Of course, as I said, I don't support him, but I just feel uneasy when I'm second guessing other people's personal experiences.
Sure.
But what I was going to say was that there's no consistency in his attitudes here. For instance, he's completely against universal pre-K and having cheap childcare. Is he saying that the mums should raise the kids themselves? Well, hang on. If you want more kids, the way you do it is by making it easier for people to have children and work.
Yeah.
I mean, not everyone can afford to have one income.
To me, it's very reminiscent of. I mean, it's like some of the same arguments that we heard coming out of people of religious faith, but it's kind of the post-religion version of that.
Yeah.
It's like, well, abortion's bad, condoms are bad, we should have more kids, have lots of kids, all that kind of thing. You shouldn't have sex outside of marriage, you shouldn't have sex without wanting to have children. It's an interesting evolution, because Vance in his 30s still represents the start of, Mike Pence could have been saying this stuff 4 years ago and it would have been very much in the prism of religion. It's now sort of out of that, and this is where it comes to this whole idea of natalism.
Yeah. Anyway, I suppose my main point is that there are serious economists who argue about this kind of stuff, and it's got nothing to do with partisanship. It's actually got nothing to do with abortion either, even though he tries to make it about abortion. There are real arguments here. It's quite a complicated issue. He's turned it into a political football, and as a result of that, he got himself into a position where Elon Musk took an interest in him and Peter Thiel took an interest in him, and that probably helped get him on, and Don Jr. took an interest in him, and they got him on the ticket. Yeah. But now he's a massive liability because it's coming back to haunt him. So what does Trump do? Because he's got 3 weeks, 4 weeks, well, he can still dump the guy.
That'd be a pretty remarkable thing.
Because Trump doesn't want this,
and he doesn't want JD getting attention. Full stop.
No.
He wants somebody like Mike Pence. He wishes Mike was back, probably.
He especially doesn't want JD getting attention, putting people offside people who want IVF. Think of how much they did backflips for IVF. Think of how much Trump has tried to get abortion off the table.
Yeah.
And now JD Vance is upsetting exactly the same people.
Yeah. So the only question is now whether Trump says, OK, JD thinks all of that, that's fine. A little bit like Mike Pence, he's the stiff in the corner. He'll keep the Christian conservatives happy. I can be a little bit more nuanced or both sides on issues like abortion. If Trump therefore says, OK, JD thinks all of that, but I think this, but he's not doing that. He's not distancing himself from this base play that JD's pursuing. So what he gains from all of this, and whether he is quietly thinking, damn it, should have been Tim Scott after all.
Yeah, I think he's not going to get rid of him, but if I was JD Vance, I'd be really careful over the next 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But I just want to talk a little bit more about the natalist issue, because like I said, this is actually a very serious issue, even though you wouldn't know it from some of the spaghetti flinging we've been watching over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I just want to take a deeper dive into this issue. Like I said, birth rates have been declining rapidly since 2007. And after a brief blip up during the COVID era, it appears to be heading down again. By the way, they're declining across most of the world. This is not just an American issue. Now, you might be thinking, so what? If couples don't want to have kids, let them not have kids. But see, that's not what's going on. Women currently in their late 20s wanted to have, on average, 2.1 children when they were 20 to 24 years old, at least according to one study. But women who are now in their late 50s wanted about the same number of children on average when they were in their early 20s. They just ended up having more kids. So women's expectations and desires of the number of children that they might have not changed. Something is just stopping the women of today having children. But what is it? And what can be done about it? Lyman Stone is a demographer who's established his own think tank focusing on natalism at the Institute for Family Studies, and he joined me earlier from Kentucky. So how much exactly is the birth rate in America declining, and how does that compare to the rest of the world?
Well, if you go back to, say, 2007 or so, in the US, the birth rate was about 2.1 children per woman. That's close to what we conventionally call replacement rate, which basically means the population would be about stable even if there was no immigration. But today it's down to about 1.6 children per woman. So that's half a child less per woman. Of course, it's kind of weird to think about children in halves. So another way to think about that is that every other woman in America has one less child than she would have, say, 15 years ago.
So does that mean America's population's about to decline, or is immigration taking care of the gap?
Well, the U.S. is not about to see a population decline. That's for sure. We did have maybe a little bit of a decline for maybe a couple months during COVID, but immigration into the United States is still very high, particularly right the last year or two. There's actually been a very large surge of migrants across the southwest U.S. border. So U.S. population is not about to decline. At the same time, there are real problems for society when young people are not able to couple, settle down, create a stable life together, and have the children that they want to have. So whatever happens to the aggregate population number is on some level besides the point. Americans on average say they want about 2.2 or 2.3 children. And yet they're not having that. That reflects an endemic problem in American, and actually I should say in virtually all industrialized societies where most countries see a similar type of gap as we have here in the US.
Okay, well, let's focus on the individual level then. If people want to have kids, but they're not having kids, then why aren't they having kids?
That's a great question. It's really easy to think, well, if you really want a kid, there are ways to get one. But it is a bit more complicated. See, the real obstacle that's going on is people aren't coupling. That is to say that of people who are married, their birth rates in the US have actually not declined all that much. They've been pretty stable for couples. What's going on is people just aren't coupling. There's a lot of reasons for that. We can talk about changes in gender cultures than we used to. Men and women inhabit very different social worlds, offline and online. But there's also economic factors. Marriage penalties in the US, that is loss of government benefits or worse taxation if you are married, have only grown for low-income people. And young people tend to be low income. Moreover, employment prospects for young men in particular have seen essentially zero improvement in the last 20 years. The average income of young men in inflation-adjusted terms hasn't grown at all, even as the United States has seen relatively rapid overall economic growth. So there are a lot of different things going on to motivate crashing marriage rates for young people. Can't get into all of them, but suffice to say, what's really going on isn't that people just can't make a baby. It's that most people want to raise a child with a partner who's committed to it as well. And finding that partner and locking them down has become a lot harder than it has been in the past.
So does that mean that rather than couples having fewer kids, the problem is fewer couples having kids at all?
It means there's fewer couples. So of those couples that exist, yeah, they're still having, maybe 2.2, 2.3, 2.4 kids on average, something like that. But there's just fewer people forming couples. That's true for marriage. But it's worth noting this is actually also true just for dating. The share of Americans who have no romantic partner at all is rising. And again, this isn't just America. We see this in a lot of industrialized countries around the world. As demand for skills and education and the rise of online socialization have kind of been a 1-2 punch of reducing the kinds of social opportunities that would give rise to romantic relationships, and also reducing the economic eligibility of young people for each other.
So how hard is it to turn around these kinds of problems? Has anyone successfully done so in the past?
Yeah, there are countries that used to have lower birth rates and then had higher ones. In the 1940s and 50s, a lot of countries had a baby boom. There were a lot of countries and parts of the US that had big crashes in fertility in the 1920s, even before the Great Depression. People often don't like those examples because they're like, oh, well, the baby boom was because of such and such a reason that we can't replicate. When the truth is that the real cause of the baby boom in the 1940s, 50s, 60s was just housing policy. Around the world, we built a lot of housing. Countries built better housing than people have had before. They were adopting new appliances. They were, getting electrification and plumbing, like all these things that a lot of their houses hadn't had before. And so they were building better houses for cheaper. And housing is the single biggest factor shaping coupling and children and these types of choices. We could do that again. We could just build tons of good houses for cheap. We could drive the profit margin on housing to razor thin levels if we chose to do so as a society. And we do know that when cities or counties or wherever allows more housing to be constructed, their birth rates do trend in a more positive direction. Beyond that, there are countries like Israel or Georgia that have seen big fertility increases within more recent history. Actually, a lot of the post-Soviet countries have seen big increases. There's a variety of reasons for that. The short answer is that they have a 1-2 punch of culture and economics. That is, they do something that motivates people to feel that they have cultural reasons to couple and have children. And then they also provide economic supports to that, like through more generous tax policy or spending or childcare or things like that. A lot of countries have done pronatal policy, and it's been extensively studied by economists. We know that it works. That is, when you pay people to have kids, they do have more kids. However, it is also the case that raising children is very expensive, and public budgets are limited. And so the amount of money that politicians give is often not nearly enough to create a big increase in fertility. There is some increase, but it's not enormous.
Finally, Lyman, environmentalists will be watching this interview and they'll be wondering, is this guy nuts? We can't have the world's population growing forever. There's only so much land and water and resources out there. So how do you respond to that?
The IPCC runs through a lot of scenarios on, how to manage climate change. And they specifically advise against population-focused measures. And the reason they advise against them is because they say, first of all, they offset. If you succeed in reducing population growth by, say, increasing education or providing birth control, what happens is people still have the same income and they still spend it on consumption. Just instead of buying diapers, they buy wine, okay? So there's no actual climate effect of reducing fertility in this generation. You only start to get benefits 30, 40 years down the line when that next generation is at peak earning and consuming years. So at the end of the day, there's not an immediate benefit to restraining fertility in terms of fighting climate change. And the challenge we have with climate change isn't in 30 years. It's right now. So if you believe that we do face a climate emergency, and I think that's actually a pretty reasonable thing to believe, then saying, oh, let's do this thing that, 1, is extremely divisive, 2, is enormously unpopular, 3, has been associated with totalitarian, authoritarian violence for a century, and 4, doesn't actually reduce emissions right now, it's pointless. If you care about reducing emissions, we need to be focused on substituting energy sources, on replacing combustion engines with electrical, on replacing sources of power with low or zero emission sources. This is where the leverage is, with innovating new solutions to problems like concrete, for example, or bunker fuel, where we don't have great zero carbon emission solutions yet. That is how we will tackle climate change, not through this quixotic campaign against people having the children that we want to save the earth for.
Lyman Stone, thanks for having a Fireside Chat.
My pleasure.
And that is it for another Fireside Chat. We will see you for Planet America at 9 p.m. on Wednesday night on ABC TV.
We have another Fireside Chat next Friday night on the ABC News. And do not forget the Pet Podcast and all the usual pod places.
Bye-bye.